Hello and welcome to Straight Talk, Supply Chain Insights, the podcast for your supply chain leader who is on the go and wants to be in the know. And now, your host, Laura Ciceri.
Welcome to Straight Talk with Supply Chain Insights. This podcast series is designed for the supply chain leader who's on the go, or at least used to be before the coronavirus, and wants to be in the know. I'm doing a series of podcasts where I'm interviewing supply chain leaders around the world to ask them the question of, with this pause, with the coronavirus, as we rethink the supply chain, what are some things that people could do to drive value? And today I'm interviewing Uwe Goehring, and he is the founder of BigByte software, and he's actually stuck in a hotel room in Panama. And Uwe, thank you for doing this podcast with me today.
Hi, Laura. Thank you.
So, Uwe, tell the group a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, I'm originally born and raised in Germany, moved to the United States in 1992, got into the world of SAP consulting, mostly doing SAP implementations at the time with Deloitte and Touche for very large companies in the United States. So I'm coming from a fairly long career of an SAP consultant. You all probably know the original SAP consulting was mainly driven to explain to the user how to use transactions and how to create a purchase order or how to post a goods receipt. As you all probably also know, that in some cases ended up as a disaster when companies totally forgot to implement the process first and then support that with the appropriate transactions. And that is what my second life is all about. I'm with my company, BigByte, for the past 10 to 15 years. We have been helping organizations that had already implemented SAP to get more out of SAP. But not only that, we also try to improve the process before we use the tool to support the process and run it in a more automated, supportive fashion. So for the last 10 to 15 years, I've worked with large-scale and medium-sized businesses in the United States primarily, but also a lot in Europe and, of course, in Asia and all over the world, because those companies have plans there. What we've been doing, we've implemented mainly three packages. The first one being SIROP, Sales Inventory Resource and Operations Planning, where we deal with finished goods inventories and their fill rates to the customer or service levels. And then the second package we call Factory Optimization. That is primarily taking the demand that comes from SIROP into a factory and turning that into a production program or production schedule in an efficient way. And the third package then taking the demand from the production schedule and making sure that we have a good level of inventory to support that production schedule in terms of raw materials without accumulating too much inventory. That package is called EMP, and stands for Effective Materials Planning. In all of this, we've put a lot of effort on changing people's minds on how they plan, changing people's or the planners' kind of thinking on how they plan their materials or products. And what we've been seeing a lot is that all those supply chains are very overwhelmed by the kind of thinking that's typical for a deterministic planning scheme. And we've been doing a lot to change that where possible.
Well, I'm working with a lot of companies that have implemented SAP but have focused on turning on the technology and maybe getting the transactions to flow, but not really feeling that they're getting the most value out of the system. And I know you've been working particularly with some make-to-order and configure-to-order companies around materials. And in this time where materials are tight, supply chains are going to have to gear back up. What have you learned that you can share with the audience about how to use the baseline SAP system and rethink material inventories and maybe get a leg up as we come through this big issue that we've got right now with the coronavirus?
The companies I'm working with, or I'm engaging with, I should say, when we talk first, they are usually running an SAP system that was set up many, many years ago. And when the SAP system was set up originally or implemented, the implementation project was limited by three factors. One, of course, is the budget. You don't have unlimited budget to implement everything that you would like. And secondly, you are limited by time. You don't have all the time in the world, and very often these implementations were done hastily. And then the third factor is you're limited by what your SAP consultant knows about the system. As I've been working with this SAP system for many, many years, I still don't know everything that's in there. It's a wealth of functionality that SAP provides here. And key to a good implementation is not to implement everything, but to implement the right thing. Every company is a little bit different, and SAP has put a lot of effort into making sure that all those industries and all those different companies can implement SAP, and therefore it's very flexible. But the challenge is to pick the right functionality for the right application. And there have been, I'm not sure if I should call them mistakes or something else, but there's a lot of sub-optimization in terms of what functionality was used and how it was taught to the user. And then, of course, there's the problem that what was implemented 15 years ago and the users that were trained 15 years ago, they are no longer there, or they are in a different position, and new people came aboard. So over the years, there's a very suboptimal SAP setup supporting probably also a suboptimal process. And when you hire a new planner, what they do is, to the best of their knowledge, they try to use this tool to the best of their knowledge and make the best out of it without too much training, because there's nobody around anymore that can explain everything that was thought through or not thought through during the implementation. And what you end up with is a planner that builds their own system. This is completely against standardization, especially when we're talking about large-scale companies that have plants all over the world and would like to have standard approaches to planning. That's not happening. And another thing that's happening is flight into Excel. If you don't know how to use this SAP system and make it our friend, then we end up using a lot of Excel spreadsheets. To make a very long story short, there's a lot of inefficiencies in the way we're using SAP, and there's a lot of inefficiencies in the way we're thinking about planning, whether that's that we think we need to plan everything deterministically, meaning trying always to bring in exactly what we need in exactly the quantity that we think we need it at exactly the time when we think we need it, and that never works out. And then people hearing a lot about buffer planning, which is a really good thing, but very often people then want to implement buffer planning, but they are not using the right application or the right functionality in SAP. An example being a static safety stock, which does not act like a buffer at all. It does actually end up with the exact opposite in terms of results. So there's a lot to be done. And what I see now, getting back to the coronavirus issue that we're having at hand, there is a lot of basics that companies should actually address before they think about the fine nuances of an optimized planning system. And those kind of basics, they are usually not addressed because we just don't have the time or have the ability to completely go back to the basics and change the system setup and actually have the guts to actually say, now we're going to stop what we're doing and we're going to almost re-implement SAP so that it supports a more efficient process. And for that, we also need to change the process sometime. And there's homegrown processes all over the place, and there's homegrown ways of how we are using this tool SAP to support that process. And what I'm saying is that now is the time that we probably could take a few steps back and really address those problems, those basics, because of all the timeouts that we're experiencing with the coronavirus. Another thing that I might want to add to it before you ask the next question is that right now we are in a situation, what I experience very often is that when we do an inventory optimization, we're finding that what really works is when you focus on your external supplier. That sounds very counterintuitive. But what's a good planning system if your external supplier can't deliver? So what we are after in our optimizations, we say, let's start at the external supplier and let's try to enable the external supplier and enable them by trying to give them a regular purchasing schedule, a regular demand. That is much more effective than as if we tell them, deliver me 500 this month and 300 next month and 2,000 in 3 months from now, and then for 3 months, nothing. And if we change that schedule all the time, that makes it very difficult for the external supplier to deliver to you. Therefore, lead times extend. They don't start a job before they have a definite purchase order. So sending them a regular demand to fill an inventory point is helping a lot. But when we do that, we find very often that we actually, because we have too much inventory, the demand breaks off to the supplier, and we're telling our supplier that they can't deliver anything for the next 6 months because the system is trying to drive the inventory down first before we get into the regular habits of deliveries. This would be a great time for right now to execute on that kind of process, as because of the coronavirus, a lot of plants are not producing anything. So we could really focus on bringing on only those materials that we really need, and telling the supplier to not deliver anything on the other materials that we try to get the inventory down.
So I agree with what you're saying, but let's get into the details. So it's a fact. Most people have implemented SAP. They've implemented it as a technology. They realize they're not getting the value. They've had a lot of turnover of people. How do they get started? Can you give an example of where you've worked with a company to do this kind of transformation?
Where did it start? I'm not sure I understand.
How do you get started? How do you, get people together and start this kind of effort? Can you give me an example of where you've worked with a company? Yes, of course.
What we do is we go into a company and we do an analysis first, of course. In the analysis, in 95% of the cases, no matter what industry, what type of make-to-stock, make-to-order, engineer-to-order places we go, we always find the same problem. And the problem is not in SAP, it's maybe in how SAP supports the process that causes the problem. And the process is predominantly deterministic thinking. So in deterministic thinking, deterministic planning, as I said before, you're trying to bring in exactly what you think you need at exactly the time when you think you need it, in exactly the quantity that you think you need it. But as we all know, the forecast is always wrong and always varies. So that never works out. And what most companies do is they put a lot of effort on forecast accuracy. I think it's much better to not try to figure out exactly what we need and when we need it, but to have an approximation and rather think about what is going to be the variability that happens to me. Because if you have variability, there's exactly 3 buffers that are developing. And those buffers are time. You're either too late or you're too early. It's inventory. You have either too much or too little. Or it's capacity. You have the ability to deliver or you don't. Or you have the production capacity or you don't. So you can do whatever you want if you're not living in the perfect world without variability where nobody lives. But you do have some variability, then it's not a question. It's a simple fact of life that those 3 buffers will develop. And now you have 2 choices. You can either wait until those 3 buffers develop, and then you can fight them with expediting or firefighting and fix them, or you can anticipate that variability and place a combination of the three buffers: time, inventory, and capacity, in order to absorb that variability when it comes in. That results in a lot less noise than when you fix everything with expediting and firefighting all the time. I'm calling that working in the system versus working on the system. If you imagine flying on an airplane from New York to Los Angeles, and who's got the biggest impact on your flight security and your comfort on that airplane? Is it the flight attendant? Is it the pilot? Or is it the engineer of the aircraft? The flight attendant and the pilot, they can only work in the system. They can only expedite or fix or apply a quick fix to a problem when a problem occurs. They've got to work inside of that system. Whereas the engineers working on the system, they can proactively change things so that the next time they don't reoccur. And that's what we want to do in planning. We want to set policy instead of doing firefighting. We don't want to wait until we have a problem and then call our supplier and deliver another 500 pieces. We want to evaluate and manage by exception. We want to see what policy works and which one doesn't, and then we want to fix the policy. If a minimum order quantity produces too much inventory, or a deterministic planning system produces too much inventory, then we have to try something else. And let's be clear here that I'm not saying we got to go completely away from deterministic planning or thinking. What I'm saying is we have to implement a rule-based system. We cannot just implement a silver bullet. That you know about all these silver bullets that are presented to us. In the beginning, it was MRP. MRP is hopelessly deterministic. It's purely deterministic. Then some other people came and said, let's fix this MRP and implement buffers. That works too, but it only works for some materials. You can't put buffers on materials that are very expensive and that you need one time a year. You can't apply a buffer to that material. It's not going to work. But on the other hand, you can have something that moves every day 100 times, and it moves very regularly from one week to the next. Why would you plan with exact numbers and change them every time when your forecast is changing? So there's different situations, and if there's different situations, we should use a different policy to fix it. And that's what we are doing with our system. We are analyzing a customer situation, and then we implement a rule-based system where we say, we got to classify your materials portfolio. We got to separate the fast movers from the slow movers. We got to separate the long lead time items from the short lead time items. We got to separate those items that are being consumed regularly from those that are being consumed irregularly. And then we got to take those systems and say, now let's take everything that moves regularly, has a short lead time and low or medium price, and is moving a lot, and put them on a buffer policy. And let's use everything that doesn't move a lot and it's very expensive, and let's use this on a deterministic planning scheme, maybe with a static safety stock. So the key to all of this is to not use just the silver bullet, but to implement the system where you're working on the system and you're applying policy and tell basically the system what to do, because you cannot manage 50,000 materials every day, but the system can, this SAP system can. So what you have to do is you got to tell the system when to issue an exception message and when just generate an order proposal that you can just simply turn into a purchase order or production order.
Well, I have two questions for you. One is, some people listening to this might think that you're saying implement DDMRP, and I think what you're saying is different. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the difference?
Yes, DDMRP is one of those silver bullets in my personal opinion. DDMRP is one way of planning it. To me, DDMRP is a buffer policy. It's a very specific buffer policy. It's a much improved reorder point procedure, in my personal opinion. I'm not claiming to be the absolute expert on DDMRP. But what stands is it's one policy. But I don't think that this one policy is solving everybody's problem. So it doesn't even save one company's all their problems. And it doesn't even solve one company's plans all their problems. It solves a problem, I believe, and if I may get into the details, I believe if you have a reasonable amount of consumption or sales for a material, and if you have a moving part that is moving somewhat consistently, then you can use the buffer that DDMRP is promoting. However, if you are faced with different situations, if you have highly expensive parts or products that are not moving regularly, I don't think we can work with buffers, because then buffers means too much inventory that doesn't get consumed and ends up in dead stock. So to me, it's like so many other systems. It's a silver bullet. It has incredible advantages, and I don't want to disparage it for what you can apply it to. It does a fantastic job, but it's only one out of many policies that a planner should understand. So I think when a planner implements DDMRP and DDMRP only, that planner is not equipped with all the tools that they need.
So I think you just can't broad brush the supply chain, and what you're doing with the translation of variability and analyzing rhythms and cycles with policy and trying to maximize current systems, I think is very sound for supply chain leaders as they're sitting there saying, okay, what do I do with my supply chain? Can you tell the group the story of a recent client where you've done this work and what the impact has been?
Yes. There's a international corporation that is a supplier to the automotive industry. They are producing parts like spark plugs, motor parts, the mufflers. And we've gone to one of their businesses in Europe, and the business is set up to have a manufacturing plant where they manufacture the parts. And they have 2 DCs in Europe, distribution centers, and many satellites to those 2 distribution centers. So the challenge was they had, so it seemed our analysis also confirmed what they told us, that they have about 4 to 5 times the inventory that they should have on some parts, and on other parts they had bad availability. Their fill rate was at around 85%, which is really bad for that business. And their inventory levels were, in one DC, they were at around 35 million. And we applied our methods. We started out with syrup. And syrup is for us an extended SNOP. We don't call it just sales and operations planning, because we believe in that area you should do 2 more things besides sales planning, which is basically forecasting. And that's why we added the I and the R to it and called it syrup. That's sales, inventory, and resource planning. So we said in our methodology, we are planning a forecast and sales planning, and then we set buffers, inventory planning, and we do a rough resource check, so that the manufacturing plant, is not overwhelmed with capacity that they can't handle. In syrup, our primary focus is on the finished products in the distribution center, with the goal to have utmost availability to our customer with the least amount of inventory, of course, you will say. But another objective was we got to enable our suppliers, internally as well as externally. Out of those 35 million, about half of them was procured from external suppliers and half of it was procured from the internal suppliers. And we could see the effects to the internal suppliers much better, of course, than to the external supplier. But it became very clear how ineffective it is when you send demand or uneven demand to your internal supplier. then you can see that they can't handle that. They don't know what to do with it. Unless they are expediting every day, they can do anything with that demand because they have a production lead time. They have a lead time to bring in their raw materials. And if you tell them, I need 5,000 today and then nothing for 3 weeks, and then I need 200, and then after that I need 10,000, and it's impossible to come up with an effective production schedule. What most manufacturing plants do then is they set other goals. They say, for example, let me run my plant by the highest possible utilization of my resources. What you end up with then, and this is what we clearly saw at that company, is that the plant was completely disconnected from the demand of the DC, that the demand thought they need for their customers. Because the plant was simply producing on high resource utilization and delivered parts that the DC didn't need and didn't sell, and they were short on those parts that the DC needed the most for their customer. So the first thing we did in Syrup was to make sure that we are connecting what the plant is producing and our external suppliers are delivering, that we are connecting that to the demand that DC has from their customers. Now, another thing, and this is the kind of change of thinking that we promoted here, is that the plant has to stop coming up with a forecast that they think is as accurate as possible, and adjusting that forecast to the nth degree and driving the production plant or the external supplier absolutely nuts in doing so. So we said, we're going to decouple the demand, the forecast, from what we are eventually sending to the plant, and we are buffering it. So instead of saying, I have a forecast of 20,125 in February, and 18,975 in March, and 22,350 in April, we said, let's have a forecast of 20,000 every month, and let's put a buffer of 25% of 5,000 in inventory in the DC. So we're sending a demand of 20,000 every month to the production plant. And we're fixing that demand for the next 3 months, which is the lead time that the production plant needs in order to get their raw materials and put a production schedule together, with the result that the plant was now experiencing a completely level demand that was not changing for the next 3 months, and they could work with that. Now, you still, of course, have the demand variability from your customers, because we all know that the customer is not exactly picking up what we forecasted. But you can see that we now absorbed all that demand variability, and I'm talking about all of it in those buffers. Now, another advantage that came about through that is that even if the customers are picking up more than 25,000, meaning more than the forecast and the buffer, when is that happening? When does that situation come from? If the plant delivers 20,000 every month, at every first of the month, and we are holding a 5,000 piece buffer, then you're starting every month with 25,000. Even if the customer picks up 26,000, those extra 1,000, you're not running out on the 5th of the month or on the 10th or on the 15th. Not even on the 20th, probably. You're running out on the 25th, the 26th, maybe on the 27th. And then instead of sending an expedite to the plant and say, give me another 500, we just wait until the next delivery comes in 3 days, and we are out of 3 days. We are out of a product for 3 days. That's a vast difference to procuring everything to lead time and saying, oh, we had the wrong forecast. We need 200 more than what we expected. Let's place another order into the production plant. They can't deliver that tomorrow. And they can't deliver it in 3 days, and they can't even deliver that in 2 weeks. It's taking them the whole lead time. So that's what we did, and the results we got out of that was the 35 million moved to 17 within 6 months. And what's more important than anything else is they stayed there. So we had a 50% inventory reduction, and it leveled off there. By now, it's been another 6 months or another 8 months that the inventory actually stayed at the 17. The other, at that same time when we reduced the inventory by 50%. The fill rate, and this is important, and this was the real success of this, went from 85% to 95% at the same time. So the availability improved drastically while we had a lot less inventory. And it was all due to the buffering system. It's not rocket science.
Well, Uwe, we're going to have to go now. I appreciate you joining the show. I think there's so many companies that have implemented SAP and not really looked at policies and rules and buffers and have broad brushed the supply chain and really focused on transactions and turning it on and not using it. And I would encourage everybody that's dealing with a material problem to reach out to you, and hopefully you're going to get out of Panama safe.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All the best. Until next time.